In lifespanning, there is no plan B. I'm Jean Faracaba, and my guests are coming to this podcast for a reason. There's no rules, no BS, just pure biohacking. I don't want to know what you have to sell. I want to know who you are. Welcome to the No Plan B, the Lifespanner podcast. Today I have Steve and Wendy, or Wendy and Steve. Normally in Europe we put women first, and women always come first, right guys?
That makes, yeah, that's a better idea.
Is that a good introduction for you guys?
Yes.
I like that.
So today we're going to talk about mainly orgasm and the whole principle of this on the brain, on the longevity, on the well-being, and on the overall interaction between human in our society. So before I go too far and too deep with my question, I would like you guys to introduce yourself, please. It's going to be a better job than if I do it.
Or would you like to tell them about you first? Or
Please, women come first.
Well, my name is Wendy McGew, or Dr. McGew. And I'm not a practicing doctor, but we studied at the IESHS, basically Doctor of Human Sexuality. And some people are like, I didn't even realize there was such a thing. So we got into that with our invention, which we can talk about later. Prior to that, I have a background in psychology and sociology.
MBA in psychology.
And Masters of Business. And that all just is a interesting background to what we're going to talk about today as far as it coming together for forming the business, the Women and Couples Wellness.
Great.
Yes, and I'm Steve McGew, and I also have a doctorate in human sexuality, which focuses on clinical sexology. Originally, I've got a BS in biochemistry, focusing on nutritional biochemistry at UNC Chapel Hill, and went to work at research center, and then in pesticide research, and then transitioned to neuroscience research at Wake Forest School of Medicine. And I was doing graduate research there and planned on that being my track, and got very career changed in the mid-90s because I realized the internet was going to be a big deal. Mm-hmm. So I went on sabbatical and co-founded an internet company that does government software. And it's a bit of a shift. Yeah. It
With
really
the goal of combining really the health and the internet.
Yes.
Yeah.
I was morbidly obese as a child, and that's why I studied nutrition in college, because I was trying to understand what was going on. And my goal in the 90s was to develop adaptive behavioral modification software, which was very, very primitive back then. But so I, got into the tech area and met the love of my life in 1999. And we dated for a few years. I got married later, and then tried to get pregnant for, I guess, about 5 years. Finally saw a fertility specialist and had a little over a year of hormone treatment and did. But that's when the tragedy happened that shifted our lives in all sorts of ways. Wendy got exposed to an infection when we visited my mom at a recovery center she was having a hip operation. And it made her
antibiotic resistant.
Yes, which
it's going to be the sickness of tomorrow anyway.
That's right.
Yes, and she became extremely ill over the next couple of weeks, and finally had to go to the hospital. And the little boy's heart was beating too slowly, so they did an emergency C-section, and he lived for a day, and she was able to hold him, but he passed away. And then she spent, because it was only about a month and a half before the due date, but then she spent over 2 years in and out of ICU because nothing would stop the infection. They'd put her on antibiotics and it would slow it down. But finally, the Mayo Clinic found an antibiotic from the 1950s that resolved it. But the problem was her uterus had reopened. She'd had to have multiple surgeries. And she had tissue adhesions all over her abdomen.
And I was going to have more surgeries, which I was already at a very, very weakened state. So just the anesthesia alone was going to compromise.
So I was very busy with a software company because I was traveling extensively, and I tried to find a solution to help her not have to have the adhesion takedown surgery. And there was a technique called the Wern technique from a group called Clear Passage Therapy in Florida that claimed it could help release tissue adhesions. And basically, you have somebody lay on a table and you press on their belly and rock very, very vigorously, shaking the whole body. But no local physical therapist would do it because it wasn't a standardized treatment.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, sorry. I'm getting too much detail.
Wow. Because, okay, before you went to these studies, you were busy traveling because of your software company. But of course, you were concerned by what was happening to Wendy at the time. So my first question on that, before we explain how you found that project, and which became after your product actually, but how you found that study and that publication about the friction and the tissues. Were you holding your activities?
I was fortunately, I had a lot of latitude because I was the co-founder and vice president of the company, but I was taking a lot of time off trying to focus on Wendy. And I was always very concerned, that she'd have an issue because the intestine can kink off and it can be lethal. So yes, it was taking a lot more time. And I was thinking if we could just get a local physical therapist to do this.
And you did a lot of research about it.
Yes.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to say, because you switched from biochemistry and neuroscience, biochemistry first, if I understood well, to software. Then you got sick. Then you're back to your roots of knowledge, like the biochemistry, the biology, and things like that. So you're jumping back on your roots of knowledge to find out a way to help her.
Yes, and I've done a lot of work in massage and earlier in my life because I started studying Tai Chi when I was 8, and
that was the missing part.
Yes, my first teacher, Kathy Walker, or Dr. Walker, also introduced me to many different things, books by Mantak Chia, and then to Tui Na, the Chinese massage techniques that are similar to acupuncture. So I was familiar with tissue adhesions because I've done martial arts pretty much all my life, but the problem is I'm not that good at it. And I get hurt a lot. So
the first lesson is how to fall properly.
Yeah, exactly. And so
we use our whole life, right?
Yeah, and even
so I knew about surface tissue adhesions, but this was about that deep in her belly, and because the uterus had apparently attached to the large intestine and the little loop of the small intestine, and so I was trying to find a way to resolve that, and I also reached out to a traditional Korean doctor that had been my mentor for more than a decade then already, and nobody really knew a solution for it.
So now nobody knows or knew a solution, including the people that are treating Wendy. Like, she's in the hospital or she's under a supervision, and our medical system was taking care of the process and trying to solve the problem by doing what? Do antibiotics?
Rounds of antibiotics, IVs to hydrate,
And the current solution they use is surgery again, where they cut the tissue adhesions to release them. But according to the studies, 80% of the time it would reattach at a different area, because basically when you have a wound that's open here, if it touches against another part of the intestine, it can grow into it. So that's the problem. She had the wound from the incision in her uterus previously, and the intestine apparently had leaned against it and just grown in together. So, and the issue is that can cause the intestine to twist if it turns the wrong way and block. So I knew that the Wern technique, when I did it on her, and I was just doing like PubMed research, trying to find any solution, and it was
just by your own, like that,
Yes, and rocking her belly she'd have that pain, and doing that would cause it to release. She could feel it releasing, but my thought was, how do you get access? How do you help her do that when I'm not there? And because you can't really do it to yourself. And then I started, because I've been studying physiology at Wake Forest, and I started thinking, well, what is going on? And if the uterus is here and the intestine's there and you're rocking it to help release it, well, my first thought was maybe if I could make her rock. So I literally took a washing machine motor.
And that was too much.
Yeah, it made her throw up. Yeah, I had a little, because I almost burned the place down twice. I learned engineering the hard way. Capacitors, or that's no whole, all sorts of things. But basically, this first thing would shake her and it would make her nauseous. And
Okay, hold on. One question for you, Wendy. How did you feel to be the lab rat at that
Yeah.
time?
Although we frequently are, because whether it's health drinks or fruit drinks or vegetable drinks. In fact, people would kind of make fun of me at work years ago, because they'd be like, "What are you drinking now?" And then they came out with like these Green Goddess drinks at the supermarket, and they started drinking that because it was as close as they could get without our homemade versions.
yeah, for when we were first dating, I bought her a Vitamixer, and back in like '99,
Yeah.
and everybody's like,
And my friends are like, "Why didn't he get you diamonds or something?"
No.
So this is useful. I'm going to use this every day.
yeah,
And 25 years later, you're still together
Yeah, still
and
using
still
it,
doing
yeah.
it. Yeah, that's pretty cool.
yeah, it's we use that pretty much every day. So,
Yeah.
but once I realized that shaking her wasn't a good route, I started thinking, well, what is going on? And the uterus is suspended on the sides of the woman's abdomen, or on the sides of her body. This thing hangs down like a sheet on each side. It's called the broad ligament.
Mhm.
And the ovaries are attached here, and the uterus and bladder are attached. Otherwise, everything would just fall down when you stand. So that's suspending them in the middle. And I thought, well, what if I could get them to shake like a whip? And because when you're rocking the body, the broad ligament is moving the uterus. So I had a lot of percussive massagers, because again, I'd been involved in massage for decades, and I tried them on her belly, and they were either painful or they didn't do anything as far as releasing that feeling of tightness. So what I ended up doing was literally getting little pieces of aluminum angle brackets from Home Depot hardware store, and I cut apart a massager, and the two percussive heads normally go like that on a rocker arm, like a seesaw. I just extended the rocker arm out, which made the amplitude higher. And I had a little bracket where I could move the head. And what I was doing is I'd press it on my, this is a massager. I'd press it on my arm here, the palmaris longus, which is a large group of muscle
And at
fascia.
the right amplitude, it'll actually make the finger wiggle. And that means that it's actually causing, that muscle to move that much. So it's going through that far in the tissue.
Yes, like a hypervolt or a Theragun pound really long ways, and that'll shake your whole arm. But I kept changing how far the head would go out, and I could feel it go farther and farther until it got out to make my finger wiggle. And then when I went farther, it just banged here. So I found a specific amplitude that would work best. And I had the contraption in a big 4-inch diameter PVC tube, and I would hold it on her belly. And when she was having pain, we can't make medical claims about that yet, but that would help resolve it. And that's where the swan dive into the twilight zone began, because it was on a Sunday afternoon, and I was using it on her belly and she could hold it on her belly too. That was the thing. When I wasn't there, she could just hold it there. And I'm going up and down on her belly, and suddenly she's like, "Oh, hold it right there, right about where her belly button was." And I'm like, "Okay," and I'm holding it there, and she starts turning a little bit flushed. I'm like, "You okay?" And she's like, "Yeah, leave it right there." And then she starts turning really flushed. And I'm like, "I'm gonna stop." And she's like, "No, leave it right." Then bam, she has an orgasm, and that's
Which had been very, very challenging, especially
Of course.
past 2 years with health.
Yeah. And I'm like, "What just happened?" And she's like, "I don't know. Try that again."
Yeah.
And
We need to experiment more.
That would never happen with the men. Try it again right away. No, you have to wait a bit.
well, that's women are very different creatures.
Yeah.
They're, especially what we found later, because that apparently is a completely separate pathway from the normal nerve pathways. And I thought about it, and I'm like, what is going on? Because I've been studying neuroscience and physiology in years past, and you got your pudendal nerve, the pelvic nerve, hypogastric nerve that are coming out of the base of the spine down there, but nothing was that high up, and we were really perplexed about it. And So I'd already done patent work in the tech company, and I knew about, all the dotting the I's and crossing the T's. So I said, well, how about this, Wendy? If you can get some of your friends to try this, you'll go over and show them how to use it, and let them go in a room and try it. Let's see if this is repeatable. And so she did. We got them to sign non-disclosure agreements and all that stuff. And the
They
women,
were wanting copies of our keys to the garage.
yeah, they literally,
And,
and that, well, the big reason, one reason for that was a woman was saying it was helping with her urinary incontinence because she'd had chronic stress-based urinary incontinence since she'd had her third kid. And so she literally would go out in the garage because we had one of them mounted so it would stand. And but this is where it just gets really weird. I went back to the Neuroscience Center. My old boss was still there. He's now, or became, the dean of physiology at Tulane now, but he was intrigued, and I'm like, this is an undefined nerve. And he's like, well, that's amazing. Good luck. I'm like, it's just the Center for Investigative Neuroscience Research. What the?
Yeah, don't you want to study this?
And
Yeah.
long story short, nobody would touch it because of the side effect. And I was like, guys, this is inducing what appears to be an orgasm in an area that doesn't seem to correlate.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, what we found later was it appears to be the distal branch of the vagus nerve that's innervating the uterus. And if you hit it with the right frequency and amplitude, it causes it to fire off. Now, we didn't know that at the time. So basically, we got stonewalled everywhere we turned because it appeared to have applications for urinary incontinence. It appeared to have applications for urinary tract infection, for pelvic pain.
And
So-
many of the women were actually in tears saying that they weren't even going to come out because they just had such a horrible migraine that when they have such terrible migraines, they can't even leave, and saying that literally their migraines were just resolved after having an orgasm. And it's not all migraines. It depends what type of migraine.
We've learned a
but-
great deal about that too.
Yeah.
Basically, if you can induce an orgasm that causes the pupils to dilate and the face and this part of the body to flush, I've never seen it not stop a migraine. And migraines.
Why is that? Do we have the explanation? The scientific explanation is like blood vessel dilatation.
It appears, yes. A migraine in most forms is basically, at least my understanding of it, is a cortical spreading depression, which, because we used to induce those in animal models when I was working in neuroscience work. Basically, you have a situation where the blood vessels constrict and then expand very, very quickly. And that produces a sensation, or the mechanism, the sequence can vary from individual, but that produces the pain perception. If you can induce the orgasm to the point that you get dilation of the pupils, it appears for some reason to, and I think it's parasympathetic response, but it's central nervous system, so I don't know. It just appears to help. Now, in a certain number of people, it'll make the headache much worse if they have vascular headaches, but that's typically about 5% of the people that we encountered. Timothy Houle, who was at Wake Forest, Dr. Houle, I believe he's now at Harvard. He was actually studying orgasm and migraine at Johns Hopkins. And I went to him at Wake and he was like, that's really intriguing. Good luck. And
Again.
so
yeah, I know. Okay.
yeah, now this is I guess times have changed, hopefully, but so there's a whole area, there's so much we've learned here that appear to be significant levers for physiology that, due to the taboo nature of it, aren't studied. And as far as dilation, migraines for central nervous system.
Well, migraines, there's
Yeah.
millions and millions, probably billions of dollars that are spent into research just for migraines.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. So that is an area I would love to collaborate with a neurologist on. I would absolutely love to do that. The challenge we had was, I even went to, probably shouldn't mention any names for that, but I went to NIH, and one gentleman was wonderful. He was the head of the geriatric urinary incontinence research team there. And he really wanted this, and we were applying for a small business innovation research grant, which those grants at the time were about $250K. And basically what the grant did was it funded you doing an exploration to decide if you should even build a prototype. Then if you were successful with that grant, you could apply for a phase 2, which was up to $3 million at the time, to actually build the prototype. Now, we actually had the prototype, and
Because we had built it from the
Yeah,
crowdfunding.
but to go back to that grant, so it was more for a mechanical approach to therapy and not a
Yes.
chemical approach to therapy, like pharmaceutical
Yes.
approach. Okay.
yes, and that we have learned is not the preferred route in the United
Of
States.
course, no.
Yeah,
Because
pick
that's
one
why I
drug.
was asking this question. Like, it's interesting to see that there are grants given to people that go on a parallel pathway when most of the money is made today by chemical and pills and pharmaceutical in the body. Like they're trying to get that way because it's money maker.
It's very sad, but and it's at least at the time, I'm not sure what the laws are today. 10% of NIH's funding for research, extramural research, was supposed to go to small business. And small businesses were defined as a certain parameter, et cetera, et cetera. What we
Inventors and
found, what we found was that the people that did the science really wanted this, but when it went to the committee, they locked us in a catch-22.
Of course.
And they said, well, you need a trial of at least one
Yeah,
person before
yeah,
we'll approve it.
yeah.
And then we found for the Institutional Review Board, it had to be a UL, I forget the number, 6602 or something, approved medical device to do a study. So we're applying for a grant to see if we even want to build a prototype, but they're saying we have to do a study with a manufactured UL approved device to get the grant to see if we want to do the
The
prototype.
chicken or the egg thing.
Yeah, and so we got stuck. Well, what I was told is I should approach, won't mention their names, but one of the larger medical device companies and work out a deal with them, because that's when now I'm not sure if that happens today to this degree, but apparently the trick is a lot of large companies will spin off a small business that's a subsidiary of them.
To get the green.
Yeah, the small business thing gets the green. And basically after reviewing it, it was like a over 60-page contract. They had complete control, and one of the guys that was advising me on it said basically, if this thing works, they're just going to stick it on the shelf.
So
And
my
they
question to you guys,
Mhm.
yeah, do you think that in America there is no chances for people coming on other paths than the standard path that is handled and governed by big pharma and or big manufacturer for medical devices? Like you're an inventor, you're building up some things in your garage. For example, I don't know, but you're building up the thing that will cure strokes or brain Alzheimer. Do you think that in our society today, it's impossible to get that system approved, whatever the path you're going to take, because it's all controlled and sealed and locked down to make sure that, as you said just a minute ago, even if you have a great product, it ends up on a shelf?
Well, I like to think it's never impossible, but the odds are stacked against you.
More improbable, I guess.
Yeah, it's it doesn't appear that we live in a true free market system. We live in a modulated, controlled.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's sad because we're the country of innovation and we should be praising those innovators and help them to get through the doors and make the science walk faster. So it's all like, yeah, if we stay on this topic, it's all political. Like the grants are political, but I think that most of the tenders and bid out there are also already sealed before they go to markets. Like they know who they're going to buy from and things like that. So it's a bit difficult because it's all made by our taxes. It's all paid by our taxes at the end of the day, and we're struggling there. If you don't adhere to those political paths, you're never going to be in the top successful or recognized tool. So how do you feel about that? Because you have a fantastic innovation product. It probably cures a lot of things. What's your strategy to make it recognized?
Well, I first always like to emphasize that we're not making any medical claims about this. We do work with a lot of doctors who.
But you could if you go through trials, or like if you go through, there is this new application that is made by Reputable. Like you give the product to people, they test it live, and you have access to data on the spot. Is like going through clinical trials, but live with people. And it's probably the way that if the FDA changes one day, or the CDC as well, it's probably the way that the new evolution of health and wellness and medical space in general will go in the future. But what restrains you from going into clinical trial and make like double-blinded testing and things like that? Is it financing?
The primary area is financing.
Okay.
It costs between $5 to $10 million for every
I know.
FDA Class 2 claim. The secondary issue, and again, I shouldn't mention the names, but fortunately, our urology advisor, Dr. Clyde Corey, he's a brilliant, brilliant doctor, urologist down in Texas. He introduced me to several of the leading people in those fields because they were residents under him 20, 25 years earlier. And the impression that the way the testing is done with devices today, it changed about 2007. In fact, a group that sells our product, Orion Medical, they sell a device for the paralyzed market and also in Europe for urinary incontinence. But they tried to get the product through they had back in 2007. And the FDA changed it so you have to have a sham device that looks identical and produces a phenomenon that somebody really couldn't tell was separate, and run that in a double-blind trial. Now, the issue is if that conceivably could be done, but it is just exceptionally, when we're a small startup and didn't even have the device at the time yet, but that's just exceptionally difficult. So that is something ultimately that we are absolutely interested in because that is the mission of why we're doing this. I mean, rolling back to the history, basically I had this contraption and it produced this phenomenon. And in the tech industry, I was advising several leading people, at least in this region, on startups because they'd come to me and say, this startup is interested in doing blah, blah, blah. What are your thoughts on it? And I just tell them what I thought, and they respected that. Well, then I go to them with this device. And first of all, they didn't believe me. And they said, well, so we literally hired people to come in, women, and demonstrate this thing. And they acted like pre-adolescent kids, laughing and all. But then when they saw it was real, they're like, you can't, no, you can't do that. You can't,
Tell me, let's go deep into that. They were laughing and things because they were thinking that the woman that you brought to test the product were faking.
I think I don't know actually what was going on in their heads, but they definitely were amused and thought, okay, they'll go ahead and see this, but they were not taking me serious or taking us seriously. Then after they saw repeatedly that it did induce what we were describing,
multiple women.
They with the facial flushing and all those characteristics, they basically, okay, we'll get back to you. And then they started avoiding me. And a good friend of mine who, a very influential guy, wants to take me out to lunch. And I meet with him and he's like, here's the deal, Steve. You have a company that does government software for land records and vital records. This device will destroy your company because your competitors we dealt with enormously large competitors from out of state. And that market is just insane as far as a dozen or so players dominate that. And it's just ridiculous, the fees they charge. When they get wind of this, it will destroy your reputation. So here's what I've done. I've talked to the guys and I've told them that, you lost your son, your wife almost died, you went through all this stuff. You basically had a midlife crisis. And for you created that crazy gadget. But now you're going to put that thing on the shelf.
Instead of buying a fancy car and
going out for blonde. So he said, just lay low for about 3 months, never speak of this again, and you're good.
That is terrible.
I
went home.
A different version of, we'll just table it. It's too controversial.
And I went home and I was talking to Wendy, and meanwhile, Wendy, I guess she was a fan of the device, but she also thought, this is really helping these women. And she said, well, if we made it to 80 and we didn't do this, won't we always wonder?
What would happen?
Yeah.
How many we could help, how many women and couples we could have helped.
Right.
We're looking at a software company valued over 20 million. So I'm like, and she said, okay, well, if our son Luke had lived after we're gone, what would he be more proud of? Land records or helping millions of women free themselves of challenges that had ruined their lives up to that point?
Yeah,
And
I think,
So I,
you're picturing our society like today because of greed. We are ready to step on helping other and showing compassion, empathy, and helping others. If there is no money involved, there is no help. And then you're touching one of the most controversial topic in our society, is some things that normally you're not even supposed to talk about, with all these new trend where you cannot even say something in a certain way, otherwise you are sexist or you're attacking people. You're touching the let me make the joke, the G spot of that
Yeah.
of that topic right there, putting your finger on it, and you're saying this is helping people, this is curing people and certain illness. I'm not surprised, but that need to change.
It does.
well,
Yeah.
basically, the next week I announced I was retiring from the company,
Now you did good.
and I exited. But let me tell you that was this
It's
has
not
not been an
easy,
easy
yeah.
path.
No.
No, we first thought we
Roller coaster ride, right?
Yeah.
You know
But you
what
have to
it's like
stand
with
for your
kids.
principle in life. You don't like, so many people are waking up in the morning and go to their job at 9 from to 5, and they're just like tired of it. They hate it. They hate their life. They hate their wife. They hate their kids. They hate everything that is around that for one reason, their freaking job. But they don't have the courage to live it for a better life. You did it.
That's
That's right.
true. And it I have to say it's been interesting.
Of
But
course.
yeah,
An entrepreneur's life is interesting. It's thrilling.
it's yes, and I can say if you're going to start a company, starting it with a manufactured hardware product in a adults related topic is not the easiest thing to do, especially in the South.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah. Unless you're starting on OnlyFans and things like that. Yeah.
It's well, what we've learned, it's so fascinating. The whole area with that, we ended up going to the Institute for Advanced Study of Human Sexuality because nobody else would research this. I contacted Kinsey, I contacted Widener, and groups will research sexual topics third person past tense. In other words, they'll do surveys on things and report what these people said happened. They do not study things first person present tense unless it's involved with physiology or pathology. Now, they will study that. But when I contacted Kinsey and said, we wanted to have this as a safe sex educational device because it works through clothing and is very quick. They're like, well, they thought I was crazy, but basically nobody would do it. And the IASHS would do real-time sexual studies. And it really was unfortunately the school closed after 40 some years in 2019. But that was truly a unique place. I can say that was one of the most unique places in the world, and it was involved in founding the major sexological groups worldwide. It's just long history for that. But getting back to that topic, the value for women's sexual health is basically $39.95.
Explain that, please.
People don't put value on women's sexual health, at least in the Western countries, the way they do men's sexual health. There is a incredible double standard there, and
it's only for the health to birth children or to support the man. And
it is even more that way in other countries.
It varies, and I can't say with authority because I haven't lived in the other countries, but in working with a lot of people from all over the world in sexology, it is very similar with that. And the thing is, women sexually are very different creatures from men, at least based on our observation. And this one reason that we're different is we have seen literally thousands of women experience this live, and that is a totally different perspective from.
Like we make the joke, we've had encouraged more women to say "Oh my God" than any preacher out there.
That's a good one.
Yeah, so it's bizarre the double standards in that area, but our goal, getting back to your original question about FDA certification, all that is our ultimate goal. What we have found though is
unless the FDA changes the way that it is proceeding these things, and maybe that will happen. I have faith in the future for one reason, and you're from that field. Like artificial intelligence is changing the whole way we're doing stuff, the whole way we're approving, accepting, rejecting, and things like that.
I totally agree.
Yeah, and the base of what you just said of a double standard for feminine sexuality is the fact that it's our education. It's years and years and generation that have been like that. Remember, just like women have the right to vote, it's not that old. We can remember it almost.
Oh yes,
Yeah.
and
So we're progressing. Our world is getting better every day, but now it's going to go faster because of artificial intelligence. So I have faith that what you're doing is going to be recognized maybe faster than you think, or than you forecast with the FDA approval. In the next 10 years, this is going to be a totally different story with the FDA.
That is our hope, definitely. I mean, the path that we are going is, instead of a medical route, we're focusing on the wellness space. Basically
the biggest market in the world.
Yeah,
that's right.
What this is a high-end sports massager that also works in the bedroom in a way you've never seen before.
It's interesting to I thought about this approach several times actually, and because it is true that it helps people in terms of releasing the neck, and I tried that on lower back. But most of the time, the more you diversify the market you try to reach in terms of business, the less success you're going to have, because you're going to be like swimming in between several competitors, and it will turn down to some sort of pricing, portability or user friendly or whatsoever. But if you stay in the market that you are made for, that's my personal thought, okay? If you stay in the market that you have designed the product for at the beginning, and the other part remains an option, this is where you are the only one doing it. There's no product equivalent to yours. And this is where you can be successful. Instead of facing competition, you're going to face like competition just for one side, an optional side of your product. But in that side, there is no one doing what you do with that approach, with those results and the backup and everything you have.
That's true. I agree. And the path we're currently on is focusing in the wellness space, primarily focusing on couples, although we have a women's health aspect of it, and also a very interesting beauty aspect. A lot of people ask how Wendy ages more slowly, and it's really intriguing with the
link between
yes, it appears that when women's oxytocin levels drop, their ability to produce collagen diminishes tremendously. So they could be taking the best collagen supplement in the world, the best vitamins, doing the right exercises, but if they're
not absorbing it,
and they're not actually producing the collagen. So that's a whole nother area that one research study of 3,500 people in Europe found that women who looked on, and what they do is they'd have women walk into a room where there was a two-way mirror, and there was a panel of people behind the mirror with a checklist, and they'd rate parameters about the woman, how old they appeared to be, healthy, et cetera, et cetera. The woman would walk in, turn around, say their name, walk out. Then she would sit down and fill out like a 15-page questionnaire about her lifestyle. And what was interesting is the second most common thing for women that looked on average 10 years younger than their actual age was they got regular mild aerobic exercise. But the most common thing was they had 3 to 4 orgasms a week. That by far was most correlated with looking younger. And that would make sense.
Do you know the statistics of like in our society? What is the average
for women? It varies, because one challenge with sexology is everything is so subjective, because I came from a quantitative science background, and everything there is very
more precise in neuroscience than
most women in the younger ages, based on a lot of studies, are once a week, twice a week. But again, it's so hard to tell, because these studies are past tense, third person, and you never know the quality of the data. Kinsey got in tremendous trouble. In fact, I've got Kinsey's original book autographed. My mentor, Dr. McLavena, worked with Kinsey and the other people, but Kinsey wrote on male sexuality in the early 50s, 48, whenever, and it's still taught in medical school today. His views on female sexuality caused an outrage, and it basically destroyed his career. Walter Pomeroy, his research assistant that actually did almost all of his research, left the Kinsey Institute in disgust after Kinsey died, and he became the first academic dean at the IASHS back in 1976. But what Kinsey said that got him in so much trouble was, based on what he had gotten from the women's reports, women especially in their younger, 18 to 45, had the same or higher sex drive as men, but it was cyclic. They would have a certain range of the month they would have that in, and it would dissipate very quickly if something disturbed them. But
the turn off.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
right.
You can exactly.
Phone call, yeah.
That's light switch. That's it.
Yeah.
So,
That's which.
so the majority of women appear, especially when they're hyper stressed, to get in a state where they don't take care of their own needs, and that is, I mean, what it all really comes down to for the aging aspect, at least it appears, is, you have your fight or flight state and you have your rest, digest, and reproduce state. Ideally, you need to be in the fight or flight state periodically during the day, and then at the end of the day, you need to shift to rest, digest, in the parasympathetic state. And if you go to bed hyper stimulated, worried, number one, you're not going to make the DHEA you need in your kidneys for the next day, so your hormonal balances will be out of whack, and you also will convert that to cortisol if you do make it. And it doesn't allow your body to recover overnight and rebuild. And you can see in women in their early 30s, when they start getting lines around their eyes, that is the sign that they are not producing as much. Well, I can't say that quantitatively, and that may make some people mad, but that's been our observation of a lot of women. Now, men, it's not as men are different with that, but your oxytocin and your vasopressin levels appear to play a major role in your body maintenance as far as your ability to heal and recover.
Yeah, today to be honest, it's quite difficult to put a straight link between anything and the state of your skin or how you look, because we have so many factors that can play a role, and you're a neuroscientist, you know that as probably better than I do. But like sugar can affect those lines as well. And of course the stress, like you said, and it's probably one of the most difficult link to establish and to follow as a track of proof or proof of concept. But yeah, I agree with you. Of course, people that are happy in general will look younger. That there is no doubt, no question. It is a true fact. And look at the people in the blue zone. They don't look as old as people living in the south of the United States.
That's true. And yes, what I was saying was a generalization, but the big picture is it appears that people that are able to shift to the recovery mode at night and then get a good night's sleep over time, on average, tend to fare much better than the people that, I mean, what I always tell people is, if you wake up at 3 a.m. thinking about everything that can go wrong in the world, and you're consistently doing it, that means you are in that hyper stressed. If you look at your heart rate variability, you'll find it's usually and
82% American.
Yes, exactly, for the majority. So that's why we have the programs that incorporate that. They distill it in just simple steps that the individual or couple together can go through to relax their body through those.
So you do events where you invite people to come over and do things to try?
Pre-pandemic, we would do training events at resorts, mainly outside the United States. We are
Why outside of the United States? Because of the judgment that you can have?
I don't want to get arrested.
You could, honestly?
Oh yeah. There's basically Louisiana is one of the worst, one of the most unusual states. The ISHS also was one of the leading experts in obscenities and the as far as the legality of it. And
That is insane. Like
there,
it's probably Puritanism that kills the whole market and perspective.
yes, and it's basically, now I'm not going to pronounce this right, but lewd and lascivious, inciting lewd and lascivious behavior
Wow.
is a law in many states that can be a felony.
You know what? I didn't even know. It's just like it reminds me the Middle Age in Europe.
Yeah.
Well, it's
I know, right?
If you dig a little deeper, even in the biohacking and the flow state communities, the groups that they talk about sexuality, but they don't actually do anything with training. And
Yeah.
there's a good reason for that. They originally worked with the Om movement, which I was very familiar with that group. I was actually asked well, long story about that, to give input on that when they started getting in trouble. But the orgasmic meditation group would have it where women could go to locations and be sexually stimulated. The founder of that is in jail. They brought up multiple, and they finally got her on sex trafficking charges, but they tried everything they could. But the biohacking and the other groups that had kind of fallen under that lady's guidance, rightfully so, retreated quickly and said, okay, we're not going to do that, because they didn't want to get arrested as well. And that's totally understandable. Now, what we have done, before my mentor, Dr. McIlvena, passed away, he really grilled me on how to teach this. And we have something
In a safe way,
in a safe way.
where it is fine in the US or anywhere pretty
Yes,
much.
and basically, as far as obscenities, it has to, well, rather than going into all the details, it has to have educational, scientific, or therapeutic merit, and it cannot be done for the intention of inducing lewd and lascivious behavior.
Okay. So you cannot market that as that way. Yeah, I got it.
Well, yeah, and
But
we're
can you put on an advertisement?
well, what we'll teach seminars on, like we have a biohacking bliss program where we take various aspects of Taoist yoga for altering mental states to induce a higher state of creativity and clarity, and then a goal setting process that you do with your partner for that. But we primarily teach that via Zoom remotely, or if there is someone on site. Number one, the instructor never. What's unique about this approach is it's over clothing, so it's nothing is unclothed.
At least, you cannot be,
Yes, but the instructors never touch any students. They don't have any interaction with any students.
Better, yeah.
The instructors never use the device engaged on any area of their body that could be perceived as inciting lewd and lascivious behavior.
Yeah.
So there is a way to do it, to teach it. Basically, what we fundamentally teach is a simple process. We call it the 3-step method, where with the device, and it's crazy looking. So I'll say the crazy looking device that will change your life. It's a method where one partner slowly massages behind the neck and down the back for the other partner. Then they massage the rear, and then, and this is in the case with the female that receiving this, and then if she wants, she can have pelvic massage. And the goal is that is done once a week minimally, where one day is just for the female and one day in a heterosexual relationship, and then one day is just for the male. So, and the male, their techniques can be done on the male. This well, rather than going into too much details for it, it gives each partner something that they can really look forward to each week. And the techniques are tremendously relaxing. Now, from that,
and they're easy to learn for anybody, even if you don't have a.
I would say it's a natural way.
Yes.
Yes, but so getting back to the question of teaching it, we teach things, online through online courses and remotely. And since the pandemic, we have not taught at live events in the U.S. We primarily would teach in Jamaica and other locations, outside of the United States. But and as far as the device, it basically, for the woman, people look at this and think, what in the world is it?
Yeah, because most people will think like, oh, it's a dildo.
Yeah, and it's not. It's for use to. This actually was later added because women weren't understanding where to align it.
Mhm.
And basically, if this lays on a woman's pelvic area, if the pelvic bone or the mons pubis, the hard bone there, that lays right here. This, if the woman's thinner, if she's heavy, you have to have a different position. This sends a compression wave that goes about that far into the abdomen. If you had your finger in the vaginal canal, you'd feel on the anterior fornix, right above the head of the cervix, that percussion wave. This compresses the entire mons pubis. So you have the glands of the clitoris, and then you have the crura, which are on each side. This sends a shock wave all the way through there. These things can begin at 4 hertz, which long story about that as far as how the nerves hear the time. This goes in increments of 4 hertz, 4, 8, 12, 16, 20, 24. This vibrates going from about 35 hertz to about 120 hertz.
So different, yeah.
Yes, because the nerves, there are 4 different types of somatoreceptors that you can feel touch with, and the goal is to target all 4 simultaneously.
At the same time, yeah.
Yeah, but even through genes or whatever, this works very, very quickly over clothing, because you're firing what we later found is the vagus nerve as well as the pudendal and the pelvic nerve. This is very interesting because a lot of my graduate research was on the sacral plexus, because what I found when you have in the spine the nerves coming out of the sacral region of the spine, they branch out, but then they go back in together in the buttocks into this little node about the size of a golf ball. And they're plexus all over the body. And it's not truly understood what they do. But what I found was women that were anorgasmic or that had pelvic pain, as well later as sometimes with urinary incontinence and fertility issues, they would have tension in their lower back, and they'd have strong tension in their rear. And if you compress that area, you impede the neural function, at least it appears to be. Or at least we know if you relax that area, it helps things.
It helps. Yeah.
So this is designed to stimulate the sacral plexus on each side. But I kind of getting off into a tangent there.
But that routine, it's basically an opportunity for the couple to help each other and exchange.
Yeah.
So, one day of the week is for the man and the other day is for the woman, and nothing's expected in return. That's like your day.
And you trigger the reward pathway. And do you think that orgasm is a biohack?
Well, I think it's one of the ultimate biohacks, frankly.
I think it completely resets the brain.
That's the thing. Yeah. You are trying to optimize the brain and blood flows and breathing and heartbeats and blood pressure. You got everything there at the same time.
Yes. I mean, breathing is the primary way, but orgasm is kind of the reset button. And for women, that's the other intriguing thing, whether it's in Taoist practices or what's been learned later. It appears women can they're grouped into 3 very different types of orgasms. There's the clitoral mediated orgasm, which is mainly spinal nerves. Then you have the ejaculatory orgasm, where urine and possibly excretion from the Skene's glands is released. That is another
Still
area.
haven't figured out that phenomenon.
Yeah.
It's been 2 studies that I know of. One was in France and one was at the ISHS. And the French study was quite interesting. That
they're hot in France.
Yeah, it's intriguing that they did it. They would have women that claimed they could achieve that, and they would first have them void their bladder. They'd use an ultrasound to look at the amount of apparent urine in their bladder. Then they would have their partner stimulate them to the point that they were about to achieve that. They did an ultrasound of the bladder, and then they achieved that, and they took a sample of the fluid, and they just did that repeatedly. And what they found was the bladder filled incredibly quickly. So something is stimulating a reaction to cause a reaction in the kidneys that's stronger than a diuretic.
Yeah.
It also had lower urea in it on average, and
so
then,
pure purification. Yeah.
Yeah, it's quite interesting. And women also have these Skene's glands, which are similar to the prostate. It's just there's one on each side. Some women will release more or less of the PSA, the prostate-specific antigen, that they release as well in that. But that is a second reaction that is a whole rabbit trail as far as what's going on there. Then there is the cervical or uterine orgasm. And that's what we originally found with the abdominal massage, because this was originally, sideways on the belly.
Right.
And we later put it here when we started experimenting with other positions and techniques. but the vaginal or uterine orgasm appears to be mediated through the distal path of the vagus nerve. And Barry Komisarek, I finally got to talk to him several years later, and we've had some wonderful discussions. At Rutgers, Barry Komisarek and Beverly Whipple did some really groundbreaking work, in my opinion, on this area, where Beverly was a paraplegic or spinal cord injury gynecological nurse, and she was working on her PhD at Rutgers now. And she came to Barry and said that it appeared several women that were patients who had complete spinal cord cuts from about the chest level claimed they could experience orgasm vaginally, but they had no sense of touch. And Barry had been doing functional MRI studies of women achieving orgasm and men. And so they took these people in, and their partners stimulated them with a non-metal device. And what they found was the cranial 10, the vagus nerve lit up, and the basal nucleus in the brainstem lit up. And it has a secondary path that eventually worked its way around to the front. So it's really intriguing what's going on there. That appears to be an independent pathway for orgasm for women that is probably associated with childbirth. And that's I'm in the process of writing a book with
Can you explain a bit on that? Yeah.
Well, it appears to be a more primitive pathway that is heavily involved in uterine contraction, because what we found is with
and observing so many orgasms, real hand, it looks, tense orgasms look very identical to childbirth.
in labor,
Yeah.
at least
Okay.
vaginal.
Okay.
And
Make sense. Yeah.
what's also intriguing about that is oxytocin will induce uterine contraction in women. That's how they induce labor frequently. But there are many intriguing things in that area. But I'm in the current
Yeah,
hopefully
you said like writing a book.
yes with Dr. Fincher, Ron Fincher. He is a intriguing. He's retired now. He's 90. He's an OBGYN that traveled all over the world in the Navy as an obstetrician. And what he found was that in cultures where women it was more accepted and believed they needed to be taken care of sexually, their conception rates were better, and their birth outcomes for natural childbirth were dramatically better.
And their stress
is
dramatically
low, yeah.
less.
Yeah.
This is out of, I think he's delivered over 4,000 babies. And he presented this in the late 80s at the American Congress of OBGYN, that doctors should talk with their patients about orgasm, and it wasn't well accepted.
Oh, boy, I'm not surprised.
Yeah. So, but he has tremendous experience in that area. So we're working on it's a fertility program that's based on we have the couples 3-step method, but you go beyond that if you're trying to get pregnant, a lot of times, you're stressed because there are cultural pressures.
Yeah.
say,
I've
parents, whatever.
experienced that.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
so you forget about all of that stuff, and you go back to the basics of the partners taking care of each other, and you build a foundation there. And then it goes step by step over a 12-week program to do the things to try to help optimize the body for conception. And that's something that, ironically, I've been working with a fertility specialist in Houston for a couple years, a medical doctor on that. And I had a protocol, but the group out of Hong Kong and China actually contacted us because that is a national priority. And
more and more countries, it's becoming a national.
Yeah, that's why. Yeah, I said before, I have faith on that. Like our world is changing and is going into the right direction on many aspects. And I think this one is one of the aspects. Of course, America can be on the forefront of many innovation, many things, but sometimes I agree with you guys. We are a bit in the back because of certain principle and governance and politics. But let's keep faith, and it's all beautiful. So when is your book coming up?
Hopefully by this summer.
Okay.
It'll be.
You have to come back to present your book.
Yes.
And where people can find you guys?
Well, if you go to himassager.com, HIMASSAGER.com, and if you want to contact me, just click on the contact us button. And I'm on Twitter, Dr. Steve McGue, a YouTube channel, all that stuff.
We're going to put all this information and the things that hopefully many women and men will contact you very soon. Guys, it was an immense pleasure having you talking about this topic that actually I don't think I ever had a podcast on this topic. So I'm very happy that is the first, and hopefully we're going to bring more people to know that is one of the most important biohack out there. And yeah, and this is thing we're talking a lot about longevity and lifespan, health span, and everything, and we just have to remind everyone that the most natural way is always the best way. This is what you guys do. Yeah.
That's right.
Yes, we appreciate it. And
Thank you.
and
Thank you,
and
guys.
John, also we want to thank you for what you're doing, because
That's
you
right.
are a breath of fresh air in this area.
Thank you.
It's
I'm
very
blessed
important.
to know you, and we're going to be doing more stuff together.
Yeah,
Yes,
we
I'm
are.
looking forward to
Yeah.
that. Your
Yeah.
magazine is just educating so many.
Thank
You know,
you.
if you think
Yeah.
about what we were talking about with the studies, and if you think about the magazines educating people out there now, what are options? Cosmo, full of ads and driving people in a direction that's not necessarily their
And,
optimal, healthiest experience.
I think that people are ready to learn more. They don't
They
want to learn all the details in the scientific way of it, but they want to be informed. And this is what you guys do. This is what we're trying to do. And working together on this will definitely make our world a better world and a better informed world. When you take off your mind everything that we've been taught or educated or brainwashed by the old generation leaders and thinker, and you look at the future, there's a lot to learn from natural behaviors, whatever they are, and orgasm is one of them.
That's absolutely true. And it's one thing if I could share real quick that might be helpful for the people listening is,
Please.
in working with a multitude of people, we have found with couples there are a few things that if you get on the same page, your life will be so much better. And if you're not on the same page, I can pretty much guarantee you're going to have problems. And the first is coming up with a common understanding of what sex actually means to each partner and what love actually means. Because sex in English is defined by context. It can be a noun, it can be a verb, it can be a multitude of different activities.
Yeah.
And I can guarantee each partner has a different idea of what that is. And they assume the other partner thinks that as well. The other is with love. Greek has 5, 7 more words for love. Sanskrit has over 92. And we have love. And the different emotions of love correlate to different motivations for sex, because they're for sex, you have a key thing is the best analogy is one motivation is you haven't eaten for 2 days and you see an all-you-can-eat buffet. You're just going to stuff yourself because you're starving. You have a pain and you're trying to relieve that pain or that pressure. Another motivation is you're mildly hungry and you're looking forward to a fine dinner with friends where you're going to have really nice foods and great conversation. And yes, you're a little hungry, but you're interested in experiencing the pleasure of the process. Another motivation is the spiritual-like state, which is the loss of la petite mort. I think if I'm pronouncing it right.
La petite mort.
Yeah, the modification of consciousness, and that's a totally different motivation. Then there's the commerce motivation, which people don't like to talk about, but it's behind everything. Women putting on makeup to impress other members of the opposite sex is related to that, and that's what we're taught as a culture in the West, that you show love and all that by buying stuff, but that's another motivation. And then ultimately you got reproduction that wraps all of that up. But the reason I'm mentioning that is many times younger in life, men will come from that first motivation of a drive. Women will be sitting there in the second motivation and then shift back and forth to the first motivation. They don't realize it. And if you can just get on the same page about what your needs are and not be embarrassed to talk about it honestly, we found that 90% of couples never truly tell each other what they want. If you can just get those basics worked out, you'll have a much happier life. Now that's easier said than done. But I just wanted to throw that out there.
Thank you for that. So that's a great conclusion. Thank you, guys. Thank you. I appreciate
Thank you as well.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Beautiful.
Take care.